Tonight we enter a world of honor and shadows. Subscribe before we begin, so you'll never miss another journey into the forgotten corners of time. Welcome, traveler of the night. You've come here to find rest, to let go of the noise of your day, and to sink into a story that belongs to another age. Take a slow breath in and let it out gently. Feel your shoulders drop, your jaw loosen, and your body soften into the place where you lie. Tonight, the world outside can wait. You have given yourself permission to pause, to drift, and to step quietly into a story whispered across centuries. As you listen, imagine yourself by the gentle crackle of a fire. The glow flickers, warm and steady, while the night beyond remains still. Outside, the wind stirs through unseen trees, but in here there is only calm. No screens, no demands. Just the steady rhythm of your breathing and the soft murmur of words that will soon guide you into sleep. Tonight, our journey takes us far away, across seas and centuries, into a land where beauty and brutality walked side by side. A land of mountains rising into mist, cherry blossoms scattering like falling snow, and steel blades gleaming beneath the moonlight. This is feudal Japan, a world that could inspire awe with its elegance, but one that would also test the limits of human endurance. A world where every step was bound by duty, every breath weighed by honor, and every choice shadowed by consequence. It was not a place where you chose who you wanted to be. You were born into a story that had already been written. If your family tilled the rice fields, then you too would bend your back to the soil. If your blood carried the name of samurai, then you bore the weight of a sword heavier than steel, the weight of discipline, of loyalty, of expectations older than your grandfather's bones. Freedom, as we understand it today, was not even a dream. To live in feudal Japan was to walk a narrow path, and to step off it was unthinkable. Yet within this strict order, life unfolded in ways both harsh and strangely beautiful. Dawn came with mist over the paddies, with wooden sandals tapping against stone, with the smell of smoke from early cooking fires. Farmers rose before the sun to tend the soil that was not theirs to own. Merchants opened their shops, arranging goods carefully, knowing that no matter how much wealth they gathered, society would place them near the bottom. Samurai polished their armor, sharpened their blades, and rehearsed rituals of respect that mattered as much as battle itself. Even the lowest classes, butchers, leather workers, those who touched death and blood, carried out duties that society pretended not to see, yet could not survive without. This was not a world of easy choices. It was a place of constant balance, where to bow too low might appear weak, and to bow too little could invite death. Where beauty was revered, in poetry, in art, in the curve of a garden stone, yet life could be ended in a single heartbeat with the flick of a blade. A society that demanded everything and returned little more than survival. And yet, when we look back across the centuries, there is something captivating in this structure, something that makes us wonder how we would fare if placed within it. Could we rise before the first light, day after day, with no hope of escape? Could we carry the expectations of ancestors long dead, never faltering, never breaking? Could we live in a world where the wrong word spoken at the wrong moment might cost us everything? The truth is, most of us would not last a single day. But tonight, you do not need to endure it. Tonight, you only need to listen. We will drift through these landscapes like silent guests. We will wander through villages, hear the hum of markets, watch the quiet rituals of the samurai, and sense the invisible weight of a system built on duty. We will explore the lives of peasants, artisans, warriors, and women who bore burdens as heavy as any blade. We will witness not just the violence, but also the poetry, the music, and the fleeting beauty that gave people strength to continue. And as we wander, your body will grow heavier with each passing moment. Your eyelids will soften, your mind will loosen its grip on the day, and history will become less like a lesson and more like a dream. If you drift away halfway through, that is perfectly fine. These words will continue without you, holding you safely until you sink into the depths of rest. So, settle deeper. Feel the mattress beneath you. Hear the imagined fire crackling in the background. Picture the soft petals of a cherry blossom drifting to the ground, slow and gentle, carried by the evening air. This is your time to rest. Tonight, the story is here to keep watch, so you don't have to. And so our journey begins into the elegant, disciplined, and unforgiving world of feudal Japan. Tonight, our story begins not with choice, but with inevitability. In feudal Japan, the first breath of a newborn child was not a symbol of infinite possibilities, but of a narrow path already carved in stone. A child's destiny was etched long before its tiny hands reached for the warmth of its mother, long before its eyes opened to the dim glow of lantern light. The system that bound every life was known as the Shi no Kosho, the strict four-tiered order of society. It placed the samurai at the top, guardians of both warfare and honor. Beneath them, the peasants, who bore the back-breaking work of cultivating rice, the very essence of life in Japan. After them came artisans, skilled with their hands, shaping wood, metal, and clay into objects of beauty and use. Below them sat the merchants, who, though they could gather wealth, were considered parasites upon the labor of others. And lower still, in the shadows history often prefers to forget, lived the Eta and Hinin, the outcasts, the untouchables. Their lives revolved around death, leather, blood, and things society needed but would not acknowledge. Imagine, if you will, that you are born into the world as the child of a peasant family. The night air is cool, and your first cries mingle with the rustle of rice stalks beyond the thin walls of your home. The floor beneath your mother is tatami, but it is frayed and worn. The fire crackles faintly in the corner, more smoke than flame. Your father's hands, hardened and calloused from long hours in the flooded paddies, cradle you for a moment. He knows what you do not, that your life has already been written in mud and sweat. When you are old enough to walk, you will rise before the sun and step into the rice fields. The work will break your back, yet it will never be yours. Your labor, your grain, your harvest, all owed to the Lord who rules over the land. Pause here and feel the texture of that life, the wetness of the fields around your ankles, the croak of frogs hidden in the reeds, the sting of summer sun on your neck as you bend hour after hour. In this world, you are not free to leave, nor to dream beyond survival. The soil holds you tighter than chains, and hunger is your constant shadow. Now shift the image. Imagine instead that you are born to a samurai household. The light in your first moments comes not only from fire, but from polished steel gleaming on its stand. Your lullabies are not just the soft songs of your mother, but the rhythm of practice in the courtyard, where your father sharpens his sword and drills his form in silence. The air smells of incense, offerings for ancestors, and of oil rubbed carefully into armor to keep rust away. Your parents do not speak of what you might one day choose to become, for your path is already set. You are samurai. You are honor. and you will carry this burden from childhood until your death. The games of your youth are not light-hearted. You learn how to kneel, how to bow, how to sit perfectly still for hours while elders speak. Every gesture, every word, is part of a ritual that demands perfection. You are taught the blade not as a toy, but as your very soul. To drop it is unthinkable. To misuse it, unforgivable. The weight of expectation is heavier than the steel itself. Both lives, the peasant and the samurai, appear different at first glance. One endures mud, the other carries steel. One lives in hunger, the other in danger. Yet both are bound by the same truth. Neither belongs to themselves. The peasant belongs to the land, the samurai to his lord. And both live under a system that demands absolute obedience. Even among the classes in between, there was little freedom. Artisans, though respected for their craft, lived only to serve the needs of others. A blacksmith might create fine swords, but he would never wield one in battle. A potter might shape bowls for rice, but he would never taste abundance himself. Merchants, who in many societies rise high with wealth, here sank near the bottom. To profit without labor was seen as dishonest, unworthy, and shameful. Imagine the frustration of counting coins that bought you comfort, but not respect. You could purchase silk, you could buy land, you could even lend to the samurai themselves, and still, you were treated as lesser. And then, further down, there were those whom society would not name except in whispers. The butchers, the leather tanners, the executioners, the people who handled death so that others did not have to face it. They were essential, yet invisible, needed, yet despised. Their very touch was believed to pollute. To be born among them was to live as a shadow among men. Children of the Eta carried the burden of shame from the moment of their first cry, branded not by crime, but by the work of their fathers. Close your eyes for a moment and let yourself drift into this world. Hear the faint rustle of silk robes against the wooden floor of a samurai home. Hear the steady thud of a pestle grinding rice into flour in a peasant's hut. Hear the crack of a whip or the clang of a hammer on iron in an artisan's forge. Each sound belongs to a class, each life bound by rules that could not be broken. This was the world into which you were born. And here lies the question that will guide us through tonight's journey. Could you endure it? Could you, with modern freedoms stitched into your every thought, bend yourself so completely to duty that there was no space left for dreams? Could you wake before the sun year after year, bowing to a system that allowed no escape? Could you live a life where honor or hunger, or perhaps both, might end you before your time? The truth is, survival here was not about thriving, it was about accepting. To resist the weight of birth was to invite ruin. The ladder of society was not meant to be climbed. It was meant to be held, to be supported, to be carried. And those who stumbled, those who tried to rise above their place, often paid the highest price. For the samurai, dishonor could mean seppuku, ritual suicide. For the peasant, disobedience could mean execution. For the merchant, too much wealth might invite suspicion, even resentment. And for the untouchables, there was no punishment worse than what they already endured: life itself. So as we begin, remember this. The weight of birth in feudal Japan was not simply heavy, it was immovable. And in that world, most of us, accustomed to choice, to freedom, to the belief that we can shape our own destinies, would not last a single day. If the weight of birth determined your place, then the rhythm of each day in feudal Japan ensured you never forgot it. Life was a cycle, unbroken, unyielding, and repeated until death. Imagine now, closing your eyes and stepping into that cycle, waking not in the comfort of your modern world, but in the strict cadence of this older one. The first light of dawn slips over the horizon, pale and cool, brushing across tiled roofs and wooden beams. The air is sharp, carrying the scent of earth, smoke, and dew. A rooster crows, not once but again and again, as though reminding everyone that sleep has ended. No one lingers in bed. In feudal Japan, there was no luxury of late mornings. Life began with the sun, because survival demanded it. For the peasant, the day starts with the soil. Before the first bowl of rice, before even a sip of warm tea, there is labor waiting. You rise from a mat laid on the floor, shake the dust from your clothes, and step outside. The fields stretch before you, green and wet, fed by careful irrigation channels. Your feet sink into the mud, cold water seeping between your toes as you begin the endless work of planting, weeding, or harvesting. Every gesture is repetitive, but it must be perfect. A missed stalk of rice, a moment of inattention, could mean less food for your family and less tribute for your lord. You are watched always, not necessarily by eyes you can see, but by the knowledge that failing to meet the tax demands brings swift and merciless punishment. For the samurai, the morning looks different, yet it is no less rigid. Rising early, you bow before the household shrine, offering incense to ancestors whose honor you carry like a shadow on your shoulders. Your body is trained from childhood to follow a rhythm of practice. Sword forms, archery drills, horseback training, repetition upon repetition until the body no longer questions, only obeys. But training is not enough. You must also perfect your posture, your words, your every gesture in the presence of your Lord. One wrong movement, one slip of discipline could bring shame greater than death. For this reason, even in peace, the samurai lived as if always preparing for war. A war against enemies, yes, but also against dishonor. The artisan's day begins with tools. A blacksmith's forge is lit, glowing red in the dimness, sparks flying as metal bends under hammer strikes. A potter spins clay on a wheel, water dripping down their arms as a vessel takes form. A carpenter shaves wood, the scent of cedar filling the air. Their work requires focus, precision, and patience. And though beauty emerges from their hands, their names are rarely remembered. They live not for recognition, but to provide the objects society demands: swords, bowls, homes, shrines. The merchant, though scorned by the system, begins the day by arranging wares. Silk is folded, coins counted, goods polished until they gleam. The merchant's world is not the soil or the sword, but the flow of trade. He greets travelers, negotiates with farmers, offers loans to samurai in need. Yet no matter how much wealth he gathers, he remains low in the social order, reminded daily that his prosperity does not translate to honor. And then there are those unseen by most, the Eiteya and Hainin, the outcasts. Their mornings begin in silence, often on the fringes of villages. They rise not to rice fields or shrines, but to tasks others refuse to touch. Skinning animals, tanning leather, carrying away the dead. The smell of blood and decay clings to them, marking them as impure. They are necessary, but despised. They move quietly, avoiding the gaze of others, for to be noticed is often to be shunned. As the day moves forward, the sun climbs higher, and the work deepens. For peasants, the heat presses down, sweat mingling with mud. For samurai, hours of training give way to formal duties, meetings, rituals, and moments spent writing poetry or calligraphy, for the warrior was expected to be as refined in art as in war. For artisans, the steady rhythm of craft continues, and for merchants, deals are struck, goods exchanged, fortunes made in the shadows of disdain. Meals are simple, often sparse. For peasants, a bowl of rice if the harvest has been kind, perhaps with miso soup or a few pickled vegetables. Fish if you are lucky, though more often reserved for samurai households. Samurai meals are more plentiful but no less structured. Rice, fish, soup, always consumed with attention to proper manners. Even at the table, ritual governs every gesture. As the sun lowers, the cycle does not ease. There is still rice to tend, armor to polish, tools to sharpen, coins to count, bodies to bury. Only when darkness begins to settle does the pace relent. Lanterns glow in wooden homes, shadows flicker against paper walls. Peasant families gather around a small fire, children drifting to sleep as their parents mend tools or whisper prayers for better harvests. Samurai families observe evening rituals, often reading poetry aloud or discussing matters of duty. Artisans put away tools, merchants count coins once more, and the outcasts retreat into the silence of night, carrying the weight of their isolation with them. This cycle repeats day after day, year after year. Seasons change, harvests rise and fall, lords come and go, but the rhythm remains unbroken. For the people of feudal Japan, life was not lived in pursuit of dreams, but in the endurance of duty. Now pause for a moment, and let the sound of this daily rhythm wash over you. Hear the splash of water as farmers bend in the paddies. Hear the clang of metal under a blacksmith's hammer. Hear the whisper of silk being unfolded in a merchant's shop. Hear the steady rasp of a blade being sharpened in the quiet of a samurai household. Each sound is soft, rhythmic, hypnotic, like a lullaby carved from labor. And yet, beneath this rhythm, there is a quiet tension. For peasants, it is the fear of tax collectors. For samurai, the dread of dishonor. For artisans, the struggle for recognition. For merchants, the sting of disdain. For the eta, the wound of being unseen. Every day the sun rises and sets upon a world both beautiful and cruel, elegant and unforgiving. As you drift deeper into rest, imagine yourself walking through a village in this time. The air smells of smoke and damp earth. The lanterns glow softly behind paper screens. A samurai passes, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Children chase each other in the dirt, their laughter brief before being hushed by stern parents. Merchants call out from stalls, their voices mingling with the clatter of coins. Somewhere on the edge of town, an outcast walks alone, carrying burdens that no one else will touch. This is the rhythm of a single day in feudal Japan. It does not bend, it does not yield. And for most of us, shaped by a world of choice and freedom, the weight of this cycle would crush us before the day was done. The cycle of life in feudal Japan was relentless, yet within that cycle, one group lived under a code so rigid, so consuming, that it shaped not just their days, but their very souls. These were the samurai, warriors bound to a code called Bushido, the way of the warrior. To speak of Bushido is to speak of discipline beyond measure, honor heavier than steel, and a life that, though admired by many, was rarely envied by those forced to live it. Close your eyes and imagine yourself stepping into the sandals of a samurai. Your day is not entirely your own, for your life belongs to your lord, your clan, and your ancestors. The morning begins, as always, with reverence. A bow before the household shrine, incense rising like whispers to the heavens. Each gesture reminds you that you are part of an unbroken chain, that your honor is not just yours, but the inheritance of your family and the legacy of those not yet born. Bushido demanded absolute loyalty. To disobey one's lord was not merely rebellion, it was a crime against nature, an act that could unravel the very order of society. From the moment a boy was old enough to stand firmly on his own feet, discipline began. Childhood in a samurai household was not carefree. There were no idle games without purpose, no laughter left unmeasured. Every lesson, every task, every moment carried the weight of shaping a future warrior. Imagine, for a moment, being that child. The morning sun has barely touched the paper walls of your home when you are shaken awake. The air is cool, carrying the faint scent of pine from the nearby woods. Your father, stern but not unkind, hands you a wooden practice sword. It feels too heavy for your small arms, but you bow as you have been taught, gripping the weapon with both hands. The day's first lesson begins before you've even rubbed the sleep from your eyes. Training was not optional. It was not merely about fighting, but about learning how to exist as a samurai. Swordsmanship was central, of course. Hours upon hours were spent repeating the same movements, striking wooden poles, practicing stances until legs trembled and arms grew numb. But combat was only one part of a larger whole. Archery was taught with equal seriousness, the bowstring biting into fingers until calluses formed. Spears, too, were drilled endlessly, their long shafts demanding strength and precision in equal measure. Beyond weapons, the mind was trained with the same intensity. A young samurai was expected to read classical texts, to study Chinese philosophy, to compose poetry, to practice calligraphy with a brush as carefully as he wielded a blade. For in Bushido, a warrior without refinement was incomplete. A samurai was not just a killer, he was a man of culture, a servant of beauty as well as of war. Meditation formed another cornerstone of this upbringing. Sitting perfectly still, often for long stretches, children learned to master their breathing, to silence their restless minds, to prepare themselves for the storms of life and battle. Stillness was not easy, yet it was essential. For only a warrior who mastered himself could hope to master his enemies. Discipline was everywhere. Meals were simple, designed not to pamper the body but to strengthen it. Bowls of rice, pickled vegetables, miso soup, rarely more. Comfort was seen as dangerous, a softness that dulled the edge of the warrior's spirit. Children were encouraged to endure cold, to walk barefoot on winter mornings, to sleep without excess bedding. Hardship was the teacher, and through hardship, strength was forged. Punishment, too, was strict. A mistake in training, a lapse in respect, a failure to bow correctly, all could bring stern correction. Yet these punishments were not delivered with cruelty. They were reminders etched into the child's memory that discipline mattered in all things. To bow properly was to show respect not only to the living, but to the ancestors who watched from the unseen world. To speak with precision was to honor the code. Every detail mattered. Girls within samurai families also received training, though their roles differed. While boys were molded into warriors of the battlefield, girls were prepared to manage the household with discipline and grace. Yet they too were taught to wield weapons. The naginata, a curved polearm, was often placed in their hands. They learned to defend their homes in times of danger, to embody loyalty and courage just as fiercely as their brothers. For in Bushido, honor was not limited to men. Women, too, were expected to carry the weight of the code. But childhood was not without its small moments of softness. A boy might pause during training to watch petals drift from a blossoming cherry tree. A girl might recite poetry at night by lantern light, her brush moving carefully across the page. These fleeting moments of beauty were allowed, even encouraged, for they reminded the young that discipline did not strip life of meaning. Instead, it was said to deepen appreciation, to make each small joy more precious. As the child grew older, the lessons intensified. Wooden swords gave way to blunted steel. Sparring became harsher, bruises and cuts more common. Archery was practiced in rain, in wind, in silence. The young samurai learned not to flinch at pain, not to complain at hardship, but to face each trial with calm acceptance. To struggle was expected, but to show weakness openly was shameful. By adolescence, training included strategy, the reading of battles past, the study of tactics, the learning of when to fight and when to wait. A samurai was taught that victory was not only about skill with the sword, but about the mind that directed it. Cunning, patience, and wisdom were as important as strength. Ceremonies marked milestones in this training. A boy might be presented with his first real blade, a symbol of trust and responsibility. He would bow before his father, before his ancestors, and vow to wield it with honor. The weight of the sword was not just physical, it was spiritual. From the moment a boy was old enough to stand firmly on his own feet, discipline began. Childhood in a samurai household was not carefree. There were no idle games without purpose, no laughter left unmeasured. Every lesson, every task, every moment carried the weight of shaping a future warrior. Imagine for a moment being that child. The morning sun has barely touched the paper walls of your home when you are shaken awake. The air is cool, carrying the faint scent of pine from the nearby woods. Your father, stern but not unkind, hands you a wooden practice sword. It feels too heavy for your small arms, but you bow as you have been taught, gripping the weapon with both hands. The day's first lesson begins before you've even rubbed the sleep from your eyes. Training was not optional. It was not merely about fighting, but about learning how to exist as a samurai. Swordsmanship was central, of course. Hours upon hours were spent repeating the same movements, striking wooden poles, practicing stances until legs trembled and arms grew numb. But combat was only one part of a larger whole. Archery was taught with equal seriousness, the bowstring biting into fingers until calluses formed. Spears, too, were drilled endlessly, their long shafts demanding strength and precision in equal measure. Beyond weapons, the mind was trained with the same intensity. A young samurai was expected to read classical texts, to study Chinese philosophy, to compose poetry, to practice calligraphy with a brush as carefully as he wielded a blade. For in Bushido, a warrior without refinement was incomplete. A samurai was not just a killer. He was a man of culture, a servant of beauty as well as of war. Meditation formed another cornerstone of this upbringing. Sitting perfectly still, often for long stretches, children learned to master their breathing, to silence their restless minds, to prepare themselves for the storms of life and battle. Stillness was not easy, yet it was essential. For only a warrior who mastered himself could hope to master his enemies. Discipline was everywhere. Meals were simple, designed not to pamper the body but to strengthen it. Bowls of rice, pickled vegetables, miso soup, rarely more. Comfort was seen as dangerous, a softness that dulled the edge of the warrior's spirit. Children were encouraged to endure cold, to walk barefoot on winter mornings, to sleep without excess bedding. Hardship was the teacher, and through hardship, strength was forged. Punishment, too, was strict. A mistake in training, a lapse in respect, a failure to bow correctly, all could bring stern correction. Yet these punishments were not delivered with cruelty. They were reminders etched into the child's memory that discipline mattered in all things. To bow properly was to show respect not only to the living, but to the ancestors who watched from the unseen world. To speak with precision was to honor the code. Every detail mattered. Girls within samurai families also received training, though their roles differed. While boys were molded into warriors of the battlefield, girls were prepared to manage the household with discipline and grace. Yet they too were taught to wield weapons. The naginata, a curved polearm, was often placed in their hands. They learned to defend their homes in times of danger, to embody loyalty and courage just as fiercely as their brothers. For in Bushido, honor was not limited to men. Women, too, were expected to carry the weight of the code. But childhood was not without its small moments of softness. A boy might pause during training to watch petals drift from a blossoming cherry tree. A girl might recite poetry at night by lantern light, her brush moving carefully across the page. These fleeting moments of beauty were allowed, even encouraged, for they reminded the young that discipline did not strip life of meaning. Instead, it was said to deepen appreciation, to make each small joy more precious. As the child grew older, the lessons intensified. Wooden swords gave way to blunted steel. Sparring became harsher, bruises and cuts more common. Archery was practiced in rain, in wind, in silence. The young samurai learned not to flinch at pain, not to complain at hardship, but to face each trial with calm acceptance. To struggle was expected, but to show weakness openly was shameful. By adolescence, training included strategy, the reading of battles past, the study of tactics, the learning of when to fight and when to wait. A samurai was taught that victory was not only about skill with the sword, but about the mind that directed it. Cunning, patience, and wisdom were as important as strength. Ceremonies marked milestones in this training. A boy might be presented with his first real blade, a symbol of trust and responsibility. He would bow before his father, before his ancestors, and vow to wield it with honor. The weight of the sword was not just physical, it was spiritual. To carry it was to accept the burden of Bushido fully. These lessons carried on until adulthood, when the young samurai was ready to serve his lord. By then, his childhood had already been spent under the weight of expectation. He had been shaped into something unyielding, something disciplined, something loyal to the very end. And yet, beneath the polished armor and the steady gaze, he remained human, capable of doubt, of longing, of dreams left unfulfilled. For many modern minds, such a childhood might seem unbearable. To live without freedom, without choice, under constant pressure, it would crush the spirit. Yet for those born into it, this was simply life. There was no question of another way, and perhaps that acceptance, that surrender to fate, was itself the truest lesson of all. Now as you rest, picture the scene. A young boy in a quiet courtyard, the sun low in the sky, the sound of cicadas filling the air. He grips a wooden sword, sweat dripping from his brow as his father watches in silence. Again and again, the boy strikes, his small frame trembling with effort, but his eyes steady with resolve. In that courtyard, a samurai is being born, not in the moment of triumph, but in the endless rhythm of practice, and so, through discipline, hardship, and devotion, children of the samurai were forged into warriors. not by choice but by destiny. Their lives belonged not to themselves, but to Bushido. And with every breath, every bow, every cut of the blade, they walked further down a path from which there was no return. While the samurai lived under the crushing weight of honor, most of Japan's people carried a different kind of burden. The peasants, farmers, laborers, and villagers formed the foundation of society. Without them, there would be no rice to eat, no tax to collect, no wealth for lords to claim. They made up the vast majority of the population, and yet their lives were often the hardest, their struggles unending, their rewards fleeting. Close your eyes and imagine the life of a peasant at dawn. The rooster has barely crowed when you rise from your thin bedding. The room is cold, the faint glow of an oil lamp casting shadows across wooden beams. You hear the steady breathing of your family around you, but rest cannot linger. The fields are waiting, and they do not forgive laziness. With quiet care, you dress in simple robes, tie the sash around your waist, and step outside into the morning mist. The land is both master and enemy. Rice paddies stretch before you, shimmering with water, each stalk a promise of survival or starvation. Your hands plunge into the mud, your body bending low as you work the soil. The chill of morning seeps into your skin, but soon the sun climbs higher, turning damp air into heavy heat. Sweat drips from your brow, blurring your vision, but the work cannot stop. Every stalk planted, every weed pulled, every back bent in labor is part of a rhythm that has no end. Peasant life was ruled by seasons. In spring, planting. In summer, tending. In autumn, harvest. In winter, mending tools and preparing for the cycle to begin again. Each season brought its own demands, and failure in one meant disaster in all. A bad harvest was not merely a setback, it could mean hunger, disease, and death. And yet, even when the fields thrived, the peasants often went hungry. For rice was not theirs to keep. Much of it was claimed as tax, collected by the local lord or his officials. Men on horseback would arrive, stern and watchful, to measure the yield and take what was owed. If the harvest was good, the lord took more. If the harvest was poor, the lord still took his share. A family might keep just enough to survive the winter, but sometimes even that was stolen away. Hiding rice was dangerous, an act of treason. If discovered, the punishment could be swift and brutal. The peasants knew this well, and so they bowed, they endured, they offered their harvests in silence. But inside, the weight of unfairness pressed down. They worked endlessly, yet their lives remained fragile. A single storm could destroy a crop. A single illness could ruin a family. And always, the Lord's demands loomed overhead, unchanging, unmerciful. Daily life was simple, yet exhausting. A peasant's diet was plain: bowls of millet or barley, rice if the family was fortunate, vegetables when available. Meat was rare, often reserved for festivals or special occasions. The body survived, but rarely thrived. Clothing, too, was humble, woven from hemp or cotton, patched and repatched until it barely held together. Homes were modest, built of wood and thatch, vulnerable to storms and fire. Privacy was scarce, comfort scarcer still, and yet, within this hardship, there was also resilience. Villages formed tight-knit communities where neighbors shared tools, traded labor, and supported one another in times of need. Festivals marked the turning of seasons, with music, dancing, and laughter offering brief respite from toil. Children played in the fields, their laughter carried on the wind, even as they learned early how to help their parents. Life was harsh, yes, but it was also bound by connection, by shared struggle, by the knowledge that no one survived alone. But the shadow of violence was never far. Samurai were tasked with protecting the land, yet they also enforced order with ruthless efficiency. A peasant who resisted too strongly, who dared to challenge authority, risked swift punishment. Beatings, imprisonment, even execution were possible outcomes. Fear was woven into the peasant's life as tightly as the straw in their sandals. Still, peasants carried a quiet strength. They endured because they had no choice, but also because endurance itself became a virtue. To rise before dawn, to work until dusk, to bow and survive another day. These were victories in their own right. In their resilience, they found a kind of honor, though society rarely acknowledged it. As you rest, picture the scene. A man stands ankle-deep in muddy water, his back bent as he plants stalk after stalk of rice. Beside him, his wife tends the seedlings, her sleeves rolled high, her hair tied back against the sweat. Children run nearby, gathering weeds or carrying buckets, their small hands already hardened by labor. Overhead, the sun burns mercilessly, yet they continue, their movements steady, practiced, endless. The field is not just soil and water. It is survival. It is duty. It is life itself. Now imagine the toll this life takes on the body. Joints ache from years of bending. Skin burns from sun and wind. Stomachs ache from hunger in lean times. Yet even so, the work never stops. For in feudal Japan, to rest too long was to risk falling behind, and to fall behind was to invite ruin. And so, peasants endured. Not with glory, not with honor, but with the quiet persistence of those who have no other choice. Their lives were not celebrated in poetry, their names rarely remembered in chronicles. But without them, the great castles, the samurai lords, the rituals of Bushido, all of it would have crumbled. The peasants were the unseen foundation of the entire society, carrying its weight on weary shoulders, generation after generation. If the fields were a peasant's world, then rice was its currency, its burden, and its prison. In feudal Japan, rice was not simply food. It was wealth, it was power, it was the very foundation of the feudal system. Lords measured their domains not by land, but by how many koku of rice it produced. A single koku being enough to feed one man for a year. Yet for the farmers who actually grew it, rice was often little more than a fleeting taste at their own tables. Picture the harvest season. The fields are golden, swaying gently in the crisp autumn air. Families gather, cutting stalks, bundling them together, laying them out to dry. The work is backbreaking, but there is pride too. The sight of full fields is a sign that the year's labor has not been wasted. Children laugh as they chase one another between bundles, the smell of straw and soil clinging to their clothes. But then come the collectors. Samurai arrive on horseback, armored, stern, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. Behind them, scribes carry scrolls, tallying the yield, measuring the tribute owed to the local lord. The peasants bow low, their eyes fixed to the ground, as cart after cart of rice is claimed. The air shifts, the joy of harvest fades into silence, the weight of loss heavy in every chest. For no matter how hard they worked, most of the rice was not theirs to keep. The taxes were crushing. In some cases, peasants were left with barely enough to survive the winter. Families learned to stretch meals, to eat millet, barley, or even wild plants when rice was scarce. In lean years, stomachs ached constantly. Children cried from hunger, and entire villages weakened under the strain. And still, the lords demanded their share. For the peasants, rice was life, but for the lords it was power, and power never yielded easily. Famine was the shadow that haunted every season. A flood, a drought, a swarm of insects, any of these could destroy a harvest. When famine struck, the peasants suffered first and most. Stories tell of families forced to boil bark for food, of children sold into servitude, of villages abandoned as the soil gave no yield. Hunger gnawed at the body and the spirit alike, leaving only desperation. Yet even in desperation, there was danger. To take too much from the Lord's stores, to protest too loudly, to resist the tax collectors. These acts could bring brutal punishment. And yet, peasants were not without their quiet forms of defiance. Some hid small caches of rice, buried in the earth or tucked into secret compartments of their homes. Others falsified yields, presenting damaged grain to officials while keeping the best for themselves. Entire villages sometimes worked together, shielding one another from detection. These acts were dangerous, yes, but they were also necessary. For without them, survival would have been impossible. The peasants knew the risks, but hunger leaves little room for fear. And so, in whispers and shadows, resistance took root. At times, resistance grew bolder. There were instances of peasant uprisings, small rebellions sparked by unbearable taxes, by famine, by cruelty from local officials. Men armed with farm tools, women shouting from the edges of fields, entire villages rising in protest. These uprisings were rarely successful, crushed quickly by samurai forces, but they left a mark. They were proof that even those bound by the lowest rungs of society still carried the fire of defiance within them. But more often, rebellion was quiet, hidden in the spaces between duty. A child slipping an extra handful of rice into a pot. A farmer turning a blind eye as his neighbor carried grain under cover of night. A village elder negotiating with collectors, stretching the truth to shield his people. These small acts, invisible to history, were the true lifelines of survival. The emotional weight of this existence cannot be overstated. To work endlessly, to give away the fruits of your labor, to watch your children go hungry while others feasted. It carved deep lines of sorrow into the soul. And yet, within this sorrow, there was also resilience. The peasants found ways to laugh, to celebrate, to carry on. Festivals still brought music and dance, even when stomachs were empty. The cycle of seasons continued, and with each spring came the hope, however fragile, of better harvests. Imagine now, sitting by a small hearth on a winter's night. The fire crackles weakly, the room dim and cold. A family gathers, bowls in hand, each filled with thin gruel. The meal is simple, unsatisfying, but it is enough to keep them alive. They speak little, their bodies weary from the year's toil, but there is comfort in their togetherness. Outside, snow falls softly, muffling the world in silence. Inside, the family clings to warmth, to hope, to one another. Such was the life of peasants in feudal Japan, bound by rice, bound by duty, bound by hunger. And yet, through it all, they endured. For endurance itself was a kind of rebellion, the refusal to give up, the determination to survive in a world that demanded everything from them and gave back so little. And so, as you rest, consider this truth. The peasants were not weak, though society placed them low. They were the strongest of all, carrying burdens that would have broken many. Their lives were not gilded with honor like the samurai, nor cushioned by wealth like the merchants. But in the quiet persistence of their days, they held up the very world. Without them, feudal Japan would have collapsed. They were the invisible pillars of a society that often forgot their worth, and yet they never forgot their duty to endure. If the peasants tilled the land and carried the weight of survival, then artisans and merchants lived in a more complex twilight, shaping the beauty, trade, and lifeblood of society while being cast aside in the rigid order of feudal Japan. They stood above peasants in wealth at times, yet below them in respect. A contradiction, a paradox, a place in society that was both vital and dishonored. In the hierarchy known as the Shai no Kosho, the samurai held the highest place, their swords a symbol of power. Below them stood the peasants, honored for producing rice and sustenance. Then came the artisans, creators of tools, pottery, fabrics, and art. And finally, the merchants, those who moved goods from hand to hand, often growing wealthier than the samurai themselves, but despised for not creating anything with their own labor. It was a strange inversion. Those who brought beauty, craft, and wealth into the world were treated with suspicion, their roles dismissed as unworthy in the eyes of the ruling class. Yet without them, life would have been gray and bare, stripped of both elegance and exchange. Imagine the workshop of a craftsman. The smell of wood shavings fills the air, the steady rasp of a plane against timber, the rhythmic strike of hammer on chisel. A lantern glows softly, illuminating the worn hands of a carpenter shaping a beam that will hold up a peasant's home, or perhaps the intricate frame of a noble's tea-house. His work requires patience, skill, and a deep knowledge of materials. Each notch, each join, must be precise. The wood, once part of a living tree swaying in the forest, now becomes part of the architecture that shelters life. Or step into the dimly lit workshop of a potter. Clay spins on a wheel, water dripping steadily as the artisan shapes the vessel with careful fingers. A bowl takes form, simple but elegant, destined to hold rice in some humble household. Another piece, perhaps more ornate, might be glazed with rich colors, awaiting its place in the tea ceremonies of the elite. Pottery was more than utility. It was a reflection of harmony, of balance, of the deep aesthetic values woven through Japanese culture. In the towns, artisans clustered together, forming guilds, passing down skills from parent to child. Blacksmiths forged blades, not the revered samurai swords. Those were made by master smiths of near-mythical status, but the farming tools, knives, and implements that peasants needed daily. Weavers sat at their looms, threads slipping through their fingers, creating fabrics both coarse and fine. The rhythmic clatter of the loom a heartbeat of daily life. Lacquerware, delicate fans, painted screens, all these things came from the hands of artisans, adding color and beauty to the otherwise simple homes and temples of the land. And yet, despite their skills, artisans were considered lower than peasants. The reasoning was simple in the eyes of the ruling class. Peasants grew rice, the foundation of survival, while artisans only transformed what already existed. To the samurai elite, artisans were useful, but not essential in the same way. Below even the artisans came the merchants. They dealt in exchange: rice, fabrics, salt, sake, oil. They connected villages to towns, towns to cities, and cities to the wider world beyond Japan's shores. In doing so, they often accumulated wealth far beyond that of the samurai who scorned them. Some merchant families grew powerful enough to influence local politics, fund temples, or even lend money to impoverished warriors. And yet, wealth did not buy respect. To the samurai, merchants were parasites, growing rich off the labor of others, producing nothing of their own. They were tolerated, but never celebrated. In the rigid hierarchy, they were the lowest of the four classes, and no amount of silver or gold could lift them higher. But reality was more complicated than hierarchy suggested. In the bustling markets of Kyoto or Osaka, merchants thrived. Their shops were filled with silks, ceramics, dried fish, and medicines. The hum of commerce filled the streets. Bargaining voices, the scent of grilled food, the laughter of children darting between stalls. Lanterns glowed warmly as evening fell, turning markets into places of light and noise, far removed from the quiet simplicity of peasant villages. Merchants were also the quiet keepers of change. They carried goods, yes, but also ideas, fashions, and stories. Through them, the influence of China and Korea flowed into Japan. New fabrics, styles of ceramics, even philosophical texts. Merchants bridged the gap between the isolated islands and the greater world beyond, though the ruling classes rarely acknowledged it. For artisans and merchants alike, exclusion from honor was a burden. They lived in a society that depended on them but looked down upon them. This weight shaped their lives, their choices, their ambitions. Yet, within this exclusion, there was also freedom. Unlike peasants bound to the land, artisans and merchants could sometimes move, travel, or seek opportunity in new places. A skilled craftsman could rise in reputation. A clever merchant could grow a network of trade that spanned provinces. Their wealth might not bring them official honor, but it could bring them comfort, influence, and security. Still, the contradiction lingered. A merchant might dine from fine porcelain while a samurai struggled to maintain his estate. Yet in public, the samurai's sword commanded respect, while the merchant bowed low. A craftsman might create an object of beauty that endured for centuries, yet his name was forgotten, lost to history, while the lord who owned it was remembered. This paradox gives us a glimpse into the complexity of feudal Japan, a world where value and honor did not always align, where those who created and sustained culture lived in the shadows of those who ruled. And yet, as you drift deeper into rest, remember this: it was often the hands of the excluded that shaped the most lasting parts of life. The artisans' bowls and fabrics, the merchants' markets and exchanges, these were the threads of daily existence, weaving the unseen fabric of society. They may have stood at the bottom of the hierarchy, but without them, the world would have been empty of both color and connection. So let your thoughts quiet now, like the steady rhythm of a loom, the soft shaping of clay, the creak of wood under a craftsman's hand. In the silent hands of artisans and merchants, the world of feudal Japan found both its beauty and its contradiction. Though artisans and merchants stood near the bottom of Japan's rigid social ladder, their fingerprints were everywhere. Every teacup lifted in ceremony, every silk robe that draped across a noble's shoulders, every lantern that glowed in the night markets. These came from hands uncelebrated in the eyes of the ruling class. Yet, in silence, they guided taste, spread culture, and sometimes even shifted the balance of power. One of the most striking examples of this hidden influence lies in the tea ceremony, a ritual that became one of Japan's most refined cultural practices. At its heart, the tea ceremony was about simplicity, mindfulness, and aesthetic beauty. But behind each elegant bowl, behind every graceful scoop of powdered tea, stood the artisans who shaped the tools. The potters who molded and fired the bowls, the lacquerers who crafted the tea caddies, the carpenters who built the serene tea houses. None of them would sit in a place of honor during the gathering. Their names were rarely remembered. Yet without their work, the ritual could not exist. The tea masters of the day, figures like Sen no Rikyu, prized imperfection, favoring rough, asymmetrical bowls over flawless symmetry. This philosophy, wabi-sabi, celebrated the beauty of impermanence and imperfection. And who brought this vision to life? It was the potters, their hands stained with clay, shaping vessels that reflected both utility and spirit. A lord might sip from the bowl, savoring the philosophy, while the artisan who made it would never be seen as his equal. Still, the artisan's quiet work became part of the spiritual soul of Japan. Merchants, too, shaped more than just markets. Though despised for their profession, they grew into silent power brokers. In bustling cities like Osaka, merchants formed tight communities, creating storehouses of rice that became almost as influential as currency itself. Rice was wealth, rice was survival, and by controlling its flow, merchants could tip the scales of fortune. Some of these families became dynasties, passing down wealth and influence for generations. They funded temples, sponsored festivals, and quietly supported artists and performers. While samurai warlords fought for territory, merchants built webs of commerce that stretched farther than any sword could reach. By the Edo period, Osaka was called the Kitchen of Japan, a center of trade and distribution that fed the nation. And it was merchants who stirred the pot, unseen but essential. The artisans, meanwhile, gave Japan its distinct look and feel. The painted screens that divided noble households, the folding fans that carried whispers of poetry, the finely woven tatami mats underfoot. These things defined daily life. Even the armor of the samurai, fierce and intimidating, bore the touch of artisans. Lacquerers, metalworkers, and leather craftsmen gave form to the warrior's protective shell. The samurai carried honor in battle, but artisans ensured that honor had shape and presence. Still, recognition rarely followed. The ruling class viewed artisans and merchants with the same air of dismissal, useful, necessary, but unworthy of respect. Their exclusion was not only social, but spiritual. In a society deeply tied to notions of purity, artisans who worked with blood, hides, or death-related trades were pushed even further aside, sliding into the realm of the ite, the untouchables. But even here, contradiction reigned. The samurai depended on their swords, yet the swordsmith, who shaped steel through fire and endless hammering, was not honored as highly as the one who wielded the blade. As centuries passed, however, the influence of artisans and merchants seeped deeper into the cultural fabric. Theater, especially kabuki, owed much of its existence to merchant patrons who funded stages, costumes, and actors. Art flourished in towns where artisans sold woodblock prints that captured everyday scenes, bustling markets, famous actors, fleeting moments of beauty. These prints, accessible and affordable, spread culture in ways the ruling class could not contain. The paradox became sharper with each passing era. Samurai might sneer at merchants, yet they often borrowed money from them. A nobleman might dismiss an artisan, yet live surrounded by the artisan's work. The exclusion remained, but influence grew. Power in feudal Japan did not always move with the clang of swords. Sometimes it moved in whispers, in brushstrokes, in patterns of silk, in the quiet counting of coins behind shuttered shop doors. For those living in this in-between world, life was a balance of humility and quiet strength. Artisans found meaning in craft, their legacy not in fame, but in the objects that outlived them. Merchants found satisfaction in community, in building networks that endured even when titles faded. Their honor was not given, It was built piece by piece in clay, in fabric, in rice, in trade. So as you drift further toward sleep, picture the glow of lanterns in a marketplace at dusk. Imagine the hum of voices, the laughter of children weaving between stalls, the scent of grilled food mingling with incense. See the rows of bowls, each unique, lined carefully on wooden planks. Hear the faint clatter of coins as merchants count their earnings, even as they know respect will not follow. And feel the presence of artisans, bent over their tools, creating beauty that would survive for centuries, even if their names did not. In the quiet margins of feudal Japan, the excluded shaped a world of color, culture, and subtle power. Their voices may have been hushed, but their influence was eternal. In the world of feudal Japan, honor and duty did not rest solely on the shoulders of men with swords. Behind the walls of wooden homes and paper screens, women carried their own burdens of expectation, silence, and sacrifice. Their roles were less visible, yet no less binding. Where men faced the weight of warfare, women faced the endless duties of the household, the pressure of obedience, and the quiet, unrelenting chains of tradition. From the moment a girl was born, her place was carefully drawn. She was taught not to ask where her life might go, but to accept that her path would be arranged by her family. Marriage was seldom about choice or affection. It was about alliances, dowries, and strengthening bonds between households. A woman's value was measured not by her dreams, but by her ability to bring honor to her family, to bear children, and to serve with loyalty. Imagine a samurai household at dawn. The men prepare their weapons, their armor, their duty to their lord. In the women's quarters, the day begins in a quieter but equally demanding rhythm. A wife oversees the servants, ensures meals are prepared, and tends to the children. Her movements are precise, her voice measured, for even within the home, a misstep could bring shame. She is not merely a companion. She is a steward of reputation, expected to embody grace and restraint in every gesture. The Onna Daigaku, or Greater Learning for Women, was a text widely circulated during the Edo period. It laid out the ideals of womanhood with stern clarity: obedience to father before marriage, obedience to husband after marriage, and obedience to sons in widowhood. A woman was to be soft-spoken, frugal, diligent, and above all, submissive. Her opinions mattered little. Her silence was often her greatest virtue. But silence did not mean insignificance. Women were the quiet backbone of households. They managed finances when husbands were away, taught daughters the arts of sewing, poetry, and etiquette, and raised sons who would one day bear swords. They were keepers of tradition, preserving not only family honor but also the subtler threads of culture, arranging flowers, conducting tea rituals, and maintaining the delicate beauty of the home. For samurai women, duty could take on harsher forms. In times of war, when enemies threatened their homes, women were expected to defend themselves and their children. Some were trained with the naginata, a long polearm blade that allowed them to fight even larger opponents. It was not considered glorious like the katana, but it was practical, suited for protecting households when men were away. Samurai daughters grew up learning to wield it, not as warriors seeking glory, but as guardians of survival. There were also women who stood apart, figures like Tomo Gozen, remembered as a fierce warrior of the late Heian period. She rode into battle alongside men, wielding bow and blade with remarkable skill. Though exceptional, her story reveals that women were not always confined to shadows. Still, tales like hers were rare, celebrated in legend but seldom reflected in everyday life. For most women, the battles they fought were invisible ones. The struggle to balance obedience with individuality. The quiet sorrow of losing children to famine or sickness. The endurance of loneliness when husbands were away serving lords or fighting wars. Life demanded resilience, but rarely offered recognition. Among peasants, women worked tirelessly in the fields beside their husbands, bent under the sun, planting rice, gathering firewood, carrying water. Their days were filled with labor, and their nights with the unending tasks of tending children and homes. For them, survival left little room for luxury, yet even here, the ideals of obedience and modesty lingered. In merchant families, women sometimes found more active roles. Wives of merchants often helped manage shops, keep accounts, and engage in trade. Though still bound by hierarchy, they occasionally wielded more influence in daily affairs than women of the samurai class, who were tightly constrained by codes of conduct. Yet across all classes, one truth remained constant. A woman's life was never fully her own. She was bound by duty to father, to husband, to sons, and to society. Her worth was measured not by what she desired, but by how well she fulfilled expectations. And still, within this cage of tradition, women found ways to express themselves. In poetry, they wrote of longing and fleeting beauty, their words delicate yet filled with quiet power. In calligraphy, they shaped characters with grace that carried both discipline and individuality. In the arrangement of flowers, the folding of fabrics, the rituals of tea, they found small spaces of creativity, places where their spirit could breathe. Picture now the image of a woman seated by a paper screen. Lantern light flickers across her face. She is sewing, the needle moving in steady rhythm through cloth. Her hands are sure, her expression calm, but inside she carries unspoken thoughts. Worries about her children, about her husband's return, about whether her household will endure the shifting tides of war and famine. Outside, the sound of the wind stirs the bamboo. Inside, she remains still, embodying both strength and silence. As you drift toward sleep, let her presence settle in your mind. Her world was not made of battles and glory, but of constancy and endurance. She did not ride into history with swords drawn, but her quiet devotion held the fabric of society together. Women of feudal Japan lived behind the screen, out of sight but never without importance. Their sacrifices were hidden, their voices hushed, yet their influence ran through every home, every family, every life. They bore the weight of shadows, and in silence, they carried honor. In the shadowed corners of feudal Japan, women lived under expectations that were as sharp as any blade. They were told to obey, to serve, to remain silent. And yet within those quiet boundaries, they bore the weight of choices, sacrifices, and unspoken resistance. Their power was subtle, often invisible, but it shaped the survival of households and the flow of generations. One of the heaviest burdens was loyalty. A woman's honor was tied not to her own deeds, but to the reputation of her family. If a husband fell from grace, the stain spread to his wife and children. If a father made an enemy, a daughter's marriage prospects could collapse. And if dishonor could not be endured, sometimes it was the women who were expected to pay the price. In samurai households, the code of Bushido, the way of the warrior, extended its grip into every corner of life. Men lived by honor, and so did their wives. It was not uncommon for a woman, upon her husband's death, to be expected to follow him into death as well. Some did so by choice, others by force of expectation. The act was seen as devotion, as ultimate loyalty. But behind it lay untold grief, a life cut short because society demanded it. There were also stories of women who performed jigai, a form of ritual suicide distinct from the male practice of seppuku. While men used the short blade to cut across the stomach, women often tied their knees together before death, so that even in death their bodies would remain composed, their dignity preserved. It is a haunting reminder that even in their final moments, women were expected to uphold ideals of modesty and restraint. But life, too, was filled with tragedies that seldom reached the written records. A woman might lose multiple children to illness, famine, or war. She might see her husband leave for service, never to return, and yet still be bound to carry the household forward. Widows often faced hardship, their security tied to the goodwill of sons or relatives. Without a man's name to shield them, many women slipped into poverty, their endurance tested day by day. Yet within this harsh framework, there were flashes of quiet power. Some women learned to wield influence not through defiance, but through patience and presence. A wise wife might guide her husband's decisions with subtle words, steering him without appearing to control. A mother might secure her children's futures by carefully arranging alliances, her foresight shaping the fate of an entire household. In a society that silenced them, women became masters of unspoken language of gestures, of timing, of influence hidden in plain sight. Consider the wives of merchants, often entrusted with managing the household accounts. Though dismissed by the ruling classes, these women sometimes controlled the flow of money more carefully than their husbands. Their ledgers told stories of trade, of risk, of survival. In these small acts of management, women carved out spaces of authority. Their names might not appear in official records, but their decisions sustained families, shops, and sometimes entire communities. In noble families, too, women could wield influence behind the scenes. Mothers of lords and warriors occasionally acted as advisors, their wisdom carried in hushed conversations rather than public decrees. In an age when appearances were everything, the quiet voice of a woman within the household could alter the course of decisions that shaped war, alliances, and governance. But for every story of influence, there were stories of heartbreak. Marriages were arranged for alliances, and women often entered homes where they were strangers, bound to husbands they had never known before the wedding day. Love, if it grew, was a rare gift. More often, it was duty and endurance that sustained the bond. And still, art became an outlet. Women wrote poems that spoke of longing, of the fleeting beauty of cherry blossoms, of rivers that carried away sorrow. Their words, preserved in diaries and scrolls, reveal hearts that felt as deeply as any warrior on the battlefield. These writings remind us that beneath the silence imposed by society, there lived vibrant emotions, hopes, and griefs. Imagine now a scene. A woman seated at her writing desk, brush in hand, ink flowing onto paper. She writes a poem in delicate strokes, a reflection on the falling of autumn leaves, on the impermanence of life. Her words are not for public eyes. They are for herself, perhaps for a friend, perhaps for a child who will one day understand. In that moment, she claims a piece of freedom, a quiet rebellion against silence. The contradictions of female life in feudal Japan are striking. Women were bound, restricted, and often overlooked. Yet they were also trusted with the heart of the household, with raising the next generation, with preserving traditions that gave life its rhythm. They lived in shadows, but their presence shaped the light. As you rest, let these images soften in your mind. A woman bowing in a quiet room, her face calm, though her heart carries worries unseen. A mother teaching her daughter to arrange flowers, passing down not only skill but resilience. A wife gazing at the road beyond the gates, waiting for a husband who may never return. These are not tales of glory, but they are tales of strength, quiet, enduring, and essential. Women of feudal Japan bore tragedies both silent and profound. Yet through silence, they built resilience. Through obedience, they found subtle ways to shape the future. They were expected to vanish into loyalty, and yet their influence still lingers, carried in the traditions, the stories, and the quiet strength of generations that followed. The world of feudal Japan was not one that allowed for laziness. The air itself seemed to demand order, precision, and discipline. For the samurai, each day began not when the sun was high, but when the world was still cloaked in the muted silence of early dawn. Imagine it. The black sky just beginning to soften into pale indigo, the chill of morning still lingering across wooden floors, and the faint rustle of bamboo groves swaying in the distance. This was the hour when warriors rose, not because they chose to, but because tradition required it. Sleep was a luxury measured against duty, and duty always won. The first breath of the morning was not taken in comfort, but in readiness. Samurai would bow to the east, where the sun was destined to rise, as though greeting both the heavens and their ancestors. Before even touching food or water, there were rituals of cleansing. Cold water was poured over the body, shocking the senses awake, reminding the spirit that discipline began with discomfort. This was not about pleasure, it was about control. Every drop of icy water was meant to steel the mind, teaching it not to recoil, but to endure. Training began with posture. To outsiders, this might seem trivial, but in feudal Japan, the way one stood, the way one breathed, even the way one held silence, mattered deeply. A crooked stance was not just sloppy, it was dishonor. For the samurai, stillness was as important as movement. Hours could be spent kneeling perfectly, back straight, shoulders relaxed, eyes lowered. To fidget, to sigh, to shift restlessly was not merely impolite, it was weakness made visible. Only when the body was properly stilled did movement begin. Wooden swords, called bokken, were lifted with arms that already trembled from repetition. Strike, reset, strike again. Hundreds of times, until the muscles no longer thought, but simply obeyed. The goal was not to swing harder, but to swing without hesitation. Every motion was sharpened by repetition until the body moved like flowing water, unthinking, precise. Sweat pooled on wooden floors, breath grew heavy, yet the strikes did not cease. To train the blade was to train the spirit. But training was not only physical. The mind, too, was carved into discipline. Warriors were expected to memorize poetry, recite philosophy, and read texts from China, where ideas of strategy and wisdom stretched back centuries. It was believed that a samurai who could not master words could never master the sword. After all, the blade might silence an enemy, but only wisdom could preserve honor after the battle. This balance between mind and body was relentless. Imagine being told, day after day, that everything you are, your thoughts, your movements, your very breath, must serve a higher code. For peasants, dawn meant the fields. For artisans, it meant craft. But for samurai, it meant erasing the self, reshaping it into something more than human and less than free. Even meals were part of training. Rice, miso, pickled vegetables, simple, unadorned, measured in portions that sustained but never indulged. To eat until full was considered indulgence. To crave was weakness. Hunger itself became a quiet teacher. It whispered of limits, of patience, of humility. Each grain of rice was a reminder that nothing should be wasted, not effort, not food, not life. As the sun finally climbed higher, drills grew harsher. Archery practice required not only strength, but calmness. The yumi, the long Japanese bow, was taller than a man, demanding both balance and stillness to draw fully. To release too soon was failure. To tremble was shame. Each arrow carried not only weight, but intention, discipline turned into flight. Then came the art of the sword. Katanas gleamed in the sun, but they were never brandished casually. Before a blade was even drawn, warriors spent hours practicing with scabbards intact, rehearsing the single fluid motion of drawing and striking. Iaido, the art of the quick draw, was not about speed. It was about certainty. There could be no pause, no correction, no second attempt. The blade left its sheath only once, and in that instant, either honor or death followed. This was the burden of the training ground. Day after day, the repetition broke men down, only to build them back into something sharper, leaner, and entirely devoted to the code of Bushido. To live in such a world meant carrying both dignity and despair. There was little room for individuality, little room for softness. And yet, within that rigidity, there was a strange kind of serenity. For when every motion of your life is dictated, when every breath is measured, there is no room left for uncertainty. Still, this was not a life many could endure. The endless drills, the silence of obedience, the suppression of self, all of it carved away at the human heart. Only those who accepted pain as a companion, who embraced repetition as ritual, survived the training. And for those who could not, there was no forgiveness. Failure was not a stumble. It was exile, disgrace, or worse. By midday, exhaustion gripped the body, yet the day was only half-lived. For in feudal Japan, training never truly ended. Whether in the field, at the table, or in the quiet of the evening, a warrior was always preparing, always refining, always disciplining himself into something the world demanded. And as night fell, the cycle prepared to repeat again. Beneath the rigorous drills and perfect posture, the life of a samurai was heavy with quiet suffering. For every strike of the sword, every pulled bowstring, there was an unseen cost: isolation, longing, and the slow erosion of personal freedom. While the body could be trained and the mind disciplined, the heart was left exposed, often lonely and rarely comforted. Picture the young boy who awakens before the sun, the cold biting his skin, his stomach empty, yet his hands already gripping a wooden sword. His friends are absent. Play is a memory of a life that feels distant. The laughter of childhood is replaced by the steady rhythm of drills, the echo of commands, the subtle hum of expectation pressing down upon him. He is learning to obey, to strike, to endure. But in the process, he is learning that the world will demand everything and give little in return. As he grows, the pattern continues. The hours stretch endlessly, practicing, memorizing, observing, absorbing the codes of honor that bind every motion. There is little room for dreams that are solely his own. Friendships are often shallow, fleeting, because attachment could become distraction. Love, if it arises, must be measured against duty. Desire itself is tamed, bent to serve the way of the warrior. The emotional toll is profound. Samurai learn to suppress fear, anger, grief, yet these feelings do not disappear. They simmer beneath the surface, unseen but ever present, like water under ice. A missed strike, a dishonored movement, a careless glance, all could bring shame. And shame in a culture obsessed with honor is a weight heavier than any armor. Loneliness becomes a companion. Even in the presence of peers or teachers, the young warrior is often isolated by expectation. He cannot share his doubts. He cannot admit fatigue without judgment. He becomes a shadow of himself, a vessel of discipline that carries a spirit stretched thin. Yet paradoxically, this loneliness also builds resilience, for a samurai must endure, lonely or not. The heart is tested as rigorously as the body. Families provide little reprieve. Many samurai spend years away from home, sent to train, to serve, or to guard distant domains. Letters are rare, visits rarer still. Mothers watch their sons depart, knowing that the boy they raised will return hardened, disciplined, and changed in ways they cannot undo. Fathers, when present, demand excellence, further shaping a life defined by obligation rather than choice. Every bond is tested, every emotion tempered by the expectation of self-mastery. And yet, the training is relentless. Even small failures are magnified. A misstep with a sword, a hesitation in strategy, a lapse in etiquette, each is a mark of weakness, remembered and carried as a lesson. The mind, like the body, is stretched to its limits. Sleep comes, but often briefly, with dreams haunted by imagined battles, feared dishonor, and the relentless echo of commands. Rest is necessary, but never complete. The body recovers, but the spirit remains alert, always on guard, always calculating, always enduring. Sacrifice is constant. Youth is traded for skill. Comfort is traded for precision. Play, curiosity, freedom, all are luxuries denied to the samurai who seeks mastery. The intensity of this life can break the unprepared, leaving behind those who falter or question. And yet, for those who persist, the reward is not merely survival, it is a form of transcendence. Strength and honor are forged in the fires of sacrifice, a fragile balance between endurance and human cost. Even within camaraderie, there is tension. Fellow warriors may be friends, yet they are also competitors, mirrors of one's own shortcomings. Every strike and every technique becomes both a test and a comparison. Pride and fear intertwine, shaping relationships with an unspoken intensity. Trust exists, but it is measured, wary, and often provisional. To be too close is to risk distraction. To be too distant is to risk isolation. And still, there is beauty in this discipline. The precision of motion, the elegance of a perfectly drawn bow, the harmony of sword and body, all offer a kind of quiet transcendence. The samurai learns that suffering and mastery are inseparable. Pain becomes a teacher, loneliness a guide, discipline a path not just to skill, but to a fragile peace. Yet the cost is undeniable. Each moment of excellence carries with it the memory of what has been sacrificed. By nightfall, when the stars appear and the world softens into shadow, the young warrior rests, but his rest is measured. The body sleeps, but the mind remains alert, reviewing every lesson, every command, every misstep. Even in dreams, training continues. The repetition, the expectation, the quiet burden of honor, it never truly leaves. This is the hidden price of the samurai life. For every blade perfected, for every arrow released, for every motion executed without error, there is a quiet loss of innocence, of freedom, of the simple pleasures of a life unbound by obligation. And yet, in accepting this, the samurai achieves a rare clarity, a focus that the ordinary world can scarcely comprehend. So, as your own eyes grow heavy, Imagine the young warrior kneeling alone in a quiet courtyard, lanterns flickering against wooden beams. He breathes deeply, feeling the cold air sharpen his mind and the weight of the day press gently on his shoulders. His body is exhausted, his spirit stretched, but within the rigor, there is purpose. In the stillness, there is clarity. And in the solitude, there is a strange, meditative peace. Even in sacrifice, there is honor. Even in loneliness, there is resilience. And even in the shadows, the light of mastery slowly, quietly grows. In the land of feudal Japan, life was never gentle, and death was never far. The air carried the scent of earth and fire, of rice fields and forge smoke, of distant battles and quiet homes. For every peasant in the mud, every artisan at their craft, every samurai on the training ground, life was bound by roles that demanded endurance, skill, and a loyalty that could not be questioned. And yet, woven into this unyielding structure was the silent thread of legacy, an invisible inheritance passed not through wealth or titles alone, but through survival, memory, and influence. To exist in this world was to move with awareness of mortality. Every decision, every motion, every breath was shadowed by consequences. The peasant knew the tax collector's demand could strip away life's sustenance. The merchant knew the ebb and flow of coin could shape entire futures. The samurai knew that one misstep, one moment of hesitation, could result in dishonor or death. Women, too, bore this knowledge, the quiet understanding that their survival and the survival of their families depended on obedience, endurance, and discretion. Yet, there was rhythm in this harshness. Daily life, no matter how exacting, carried a kind of poetry, a pattern that brought both comfort and foreboding. Dawn would awaken the fields with labor, the villages with trade, the dojo with practice. Midday sun carried the scent of rice, the clatter of tools, the distant hum of rivers. Evening drew lanterns into soft light, shadows lengthening across walls, courtyards, and streets. And nightfall, always inevitable, offered quiet reflection, sometimes in fear, sometimes in hope, but always in the presence of life's impermanence. For the samurai, the culmination of all effort was not merely survival, but honor. Every strike perfected, every movement mastered, every moment of discipline endured, contributed to a life that, though fleeting, could leave a mark remembered by ancestors and descendants alike. But honor was fragile. A battle lost, a debt unpaid, a word spoken without thought. All could erode what years of training had built. Death, too, was never merely personal. It rippled through families, households, and clans. In this understanding, life itself became a meditation, an endless balance between action and restraint, duty and self-preservation. Among the peasantry, survival carried its own gravity. The rice paddies, the mud under fingernails, the cycles of planting and harvest, all were imbued with both simplicity and risk. A failed crop could mean famine. A hidden portion of grain could mean execution. Every day was a negotiation between life and death, effort and chance, obedience and cunning. Even in the humblest homes, the awareness of mortality shaped the way families spoke, moved, and dreamed. Artisans and merchants, though sometimes shielded from physical hardship, carried their own weight. Artisans bore the precision of creation, the demand for beauty that would outlast them, while merchants bore the uncertainty of commerce, the fear of failure, and the burden of influence that could elevate or ruin them. Their legacy was both tangible and intangible, crafted objects, accumulated wealth, and the subtle shaping of culture that would ripple across generations. Women, too, contributed silently to the enduring legacy of feudal Japan. Through devotion, instruction, and quiet influence, they ensured that households survived, that children were raised, that traditions were preserved. Their contributions were rarely recorded in chronicles of war or victory, yet they were the threads that held the social fabric together. The honor of a household often rested as much on a woman's wisdom, patience, and resilience as on the sword of her husband or son. In moments of reflection, the people of feudal Japan must have sensed the impermanence of all things. The cherry blossoms that bloom so briefly are a constant reminder that beauty and life are fleeting. The bamboo that bends but does not break teaches resilience. The rivers that flow silently carry both joy and sorrow downstream. In this world, mortality was never a distant concept. It was present in every meal, every bough, every blade, every breath. Yet, even under such heavy awareness, there was a quiet, almost meditative peace. For in understanding the impermanence of life, people found clarity in their roles. Every action, every choice, every moment of endurance became meaningful. Honor was not a fleeting reward, but a path to be walked with awareness. Survival was not merely physical, but spiritual, a negotiation between the constraints imposed by society and the inner strength one cultivated in silence. The culmination of daily life in feudal Japan was thus both ordinary and extraordinary. A single day could encompass toil, reflection, training, and ritual. It could hold joy, fear, sorrow, and fleeting moments of serenity. And as each day passed, it contributed to the larger tapestry of existence, creating threads of legacy that would ripple across time. To exist in this world was to move with awareness of mortality. Every decision, every motion, every breath was shadowed by consequences. The peasant knew the tax collector's demand could strip away life's sustenance. The merchant knew the ebb and flow of coin could shape entire futures. The samurai knew that one misstep, one moment of hesitation, could result in dishonor or death. Women, too, bore this knowledge, the quiet understanding that their survival and the survival of their families depended on obedience, endurance, and discretion. Yet there was rhythm in this harshness. Daily life, no matter how exacting, carried a kind of poetry, a pattern that brought both comfort and foreboding. Dawn would awaken the fields with labor, the villages with trade, the dojo with practice. Midday sun carried the scent of rice, the clatter of tools, the distant hum of rivers. Evening drew lanterns into soft light, shadows lengthening across walls, courtyards, and streets. And nightfall, always inevitable, offered quiet reflection, sometimes in fear, sometimes in hope, but always in the presence of life's impermanence. For the samurai, the culmination of all effort was not merely survival, but honor. Every strike perfected, every movement mastered, every moment of discipline endured, contributed to a life that, though fleeting, could leave a mark remembered by ancestors and descendants alike. But honor was fragile. A battle lost, a debt unpaid, a word spoken without thought. All could erode what years of training had built. Death, too, was never merely personal. It rippled through families, households, and clans. In this understanding, life itself became a meditation, an endless balance between action and restraint, duty and self-preservation. Among the peasantry, survival carried its own gravity. The rice paddies, the mud under fingernails, the cycles of planting and harvest, all were imbued with both simplicity and risk. A failed crop could mean famine, A hidden portion of grain could mean execution. Every day was a negotiation between life and death, effort and chance, obedience and cunning. Even in the humblest homes, the awareness of mortality shaped the way families spoke, moved, and dreamed. Artisans and merchants, though sometimes shielded from physical hardship, carried their own weight. Artisans bore the precision of creation, the demand for beauty that would outlast them, while merchants bore the uncertainty of commerce, the fear of failure, and the burden of influence that could elevate or ruin them. Their legacy was both tangible and intangible: crafted objects, accumulated wealth, and the subtle shaping of culture that would ripple across generations. Women, too, contributed silently to the enduring legacy of feudal Japan. Through devotion, instruction, and quiet influence, they ensured that households survived, that children were raised, that traditions were preserved. Their contributions were rarely recorded in chronicles of war or victory, yet they were the threads that held the social fabric together. The honor of a household often rested as much on a woman's wisdom, patience, and resilience as on the sword of her husband or son. In moments of reflection, the people of feudal Japan must have sensed the impermanence of all things. The cherry blossoms that bloom so briefly are a constant reminder that beauty and life are fleeting. The bamboo that bends but does not break teaches resilience. The rivers that flow silently carry both joy and sorrow downstream. In this world, mortality was never a distant concept. It was present in every meal, every bough, every blade, every breath. Yet, even under such heavy awareness, there was a quiet, almost meditative peace. For in understanding the impermanence of life, people found clarity in their roles. Every action, every choice, every moment of endurance became meaningful. Honor was not a fleeting reward, but a path to be walked with awareness. Survival was not merely physical, but spiritual, a negotiation between the constraints imposed by society and the inner strength one cultivated in silence. The culmination of daily life in feudal Japan was thus both ordinary and extraordinary. A single day could encompass toil, reflection, training, and ritual. It could hold joy, fear, sorrow, and fleeting moments of serenity. And as each day passed, it contributed to the larger tapestry of existence, creating threads of legacy that would ripple across time.